welcome to the channel. Today we're going to do a little benchmark testing using the Wildlife Unlimited Stress Test to see what we can find out about these various handhelds. First, let's introduce the players here. We have the Razer Edge Wi-Fi. We have the Anbernic RG Cube over here. We have the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, the Odin 2 Mini, the Anbernic RG 405M, the regular Odin 2, this is an Odin 2 Pro, and hiding over here in the corner, you can just barely see it, we have the Anbernic RG 556. I also have a few special guests for comparisons, which we'll get to later in the video. So here's how this video is organized. If you would like to see the full results of the Wildlife Unlimited Stress Test on each handheld, I've included short little snippets that show you the performance graphs and all that other good stuff. But by and large, you probably don't want to watch all of that stuff anyway. So I've got timestamps so you can skip to a specific handheld if you like, or you can just skip all the way to the results table at the end. So with that out of the way, let's get started with the testing and see what we can learn. So here are the results for the Wildlife Unlimited stress test for all these handhelds and a few special guests that I added down here at the bottom. So one thing, this test actually measures the GPU performance rather than the CPU. So this kind of test is going to show you a little bit about performance for games that heavily depend on the GPU, 3D games, stuff like Zenless Zone Zero if you're playing on Android, or actually iOS, I guess, because of the two devices at the bottom. But GPU heavy stuff, emulators that depend on the GPU. Of course, you might say, well, wait a minute, if this only tests the GPU, why did you choose this particular test? Well, for this run, I wanted to have a test that would at least run on all of these different devices. So looking through the 3D Mark tests that I had available on the app, various ones would just not run on the devices. A lot of them didn't want to run on the older devices like not the RG Cube, but the RG405M and the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus because they just don't have enough RAM. And some of them don't have enough features to actually run the tests. So I had to go through the tests and find something that would actually run on all these things. I'll probably do some future tests and leave out some of the really old devices like the T618 based ones. But for now, I wanted to get a chart that had everything. So that's why I picked Wildlife Unlimited stress test. Now, the other reason I picked the stress test is I wanted to see if the performance would stay the same over time or whether you'd see the performance degrade for some of these devices because of, devices overheating, bad thermals, what have you. So that at least the stress test enabled us to get some look at that. So just some things to note here. The T820 devices, your Anbernic RG Cubed and the RG556, yeah, they're not the fastest devices out there. You're getting 8 to 23 frames per second in this test. They get in the 30s. Most of these devices ended up, at least if you believe the temperatures that the device itself reports, in the 30s in terms of temperature after it's been running for a while. A few of them do get noticeably warmer. We'll talk about that too. But the RG cubes are pretty stable. They give the same results over time, although the results are not terribly impressive for either of the two T820 devices. Of course, the T618s are actually passively cooled. There's no fans in either one of them, but they were pretty stable over these runs. Of course, the performance was nothing to write home about, so I guess it's not really that surprising they were able to hold up their complete lack of performance over the period of the test. I was actually worried about these, whether the battery would die before the test got complete for the old T618 devices, because they took quite a while to run. Now, the Retroid Pocket 3 got kind of warm, 50 degrees C, and it was actually pretty hot to the touch when I picked it up after the test had been done, but it did actually keep on chugging, well, for what it's worth, for 3 to 12 frames per second. So, these old devices were able to keep their performance, but their performance was pretty limited anyway. So one thing I noticed is the Razer Edge. One of the things that they said about this particular chipset was that it did run hot, and the G3X Gen 1 is basically a rebadged Snapdragon 888 Plus, which people complained that chip ran way too hot. And we did actually see a drop-off after a while in performance, so stability was 86.8%. So we see a little drop-off here. Actually, it maintains that through different tests. So there is some performance loss over time with the Razer Edge. Although I did repeated tests and it showed pretty much the same behavior every time. So that's about all the drop-off you're going to get. We did get 20 to 42 frames per second with this, which is respectable for this test. So this handheld, by the way, the Edge, if you get the the 5G version that has more RAM, you can actually run stuff like Zenless Zone Zero at 60 frames per second at low to medium settings. So just to give you an idea of what a score like this means in terms of practical applications. Now, so the Razer Edge did show a little bit of drop off over time, I guess because it's running a bit warm. It did get on the warm side for some of these devices here. I got to 38. I think the fan likes to blow to try to keep this thing as cool as possible. But even then, we saw a little bit of decrease in performance. Now, the Odins, the Odin 2 Mini Base and the Odin 2 Pro, both are essentially identical chipsets. I did run these a few times. I didn't just run one test, but run it a few times. I saw results that were pretty consistent with the ones that I have in the video. Notice that the Odin 2 Mini has slightly lower performance than the Odin 2 Pro. And one thing to notice here is they're both pretty stable, 99.4, 99.8%. So there's not huge drops in performance or anything with either of these two devices. The frame rates are pretty similar, although, and running this multiple times, the frame rates were pretty consistent. There's a very slight difference in the frames per second between the Mini Base and the Mini Pro, but it's in the favor of the Pro, the big model. And one thing that's definitely a difference here is the Odin 2 Mini Base definitely runs hotter doing these tests than the Pro does, than the regular Odin 2 does, because I ran this a few times. This particular run was 29 degrees C at the end of the test, but some others ended up being in the lower 30s, kind of like the Anbernics up here. But we didn't ever get to anything as hot as this. I ran the Odin 2 Mini a few times, and I did notice that the temperatures were pretty much always higher than the Odin 2 Pro. This one got to 43. The temperatures in the several runs that I did were always ended up in, at minimum, the high 30s and into the 40s here. So, I have a speculation about this, but I have no way of proving it one way or the other because I only have one of each device. But I wonder if the Mini Base, or the Mini Base and Pro, all the Minis, have been tuned a bit to lower the performance a bit because of this heat, just to make sure that the cooling system can keep up. They're still pretty stable, so the device is getting cooled, but it is actually running very slightly slower than the regular Odin 2 is. So if anybody wants to test that theory, run some of these benchmark tests on your Odin 2 Mini Base or your Odin 2 or your regular Odin 2, and if we have enough data, maybe we can get to the bottom of this. But so far, it looks like maybe the base, or sorry, not the base, but the Odin 2 Mini has been maybe tuned a bit just to address possible heat issues, which is, I guess, not surprising because the Mini is packing the same chipset into a much smaller package than the regular Odin 2 is. Now, most of these devices, at least the more powerful ones of the handhelds, have active cooling. And if you take a look, if you go back and look in the results for the Apple iPad Pro here and the iPhone 12, then one thing you'll notice immediately is that these devices are both passively cooled, and they can have pretty darn high performance, but not for very long. If you look at the iPad's graph, the thing is screaming for about 60 seconds. And then after 60 seconds, it drops off to the low here. So it looks like it throttles itself pretty hard after about a minute. The iPhone 12 Pro does pretty much the same thing. Over the course of less than about 100 seconds, it basically throttles back. And I actually noticed in the testing that these numbers in particular just got lower and lower as the phone actually warmed up. After I've run the test a couple of times, the both the high and the low ended up being substantially lower on the iPhone 12 Pro. This is just the best run for the iPhone here. But you can clearly see why these chipsets need to be actively cooled, because the iPad is a great performer for 60 seconds, and then it pretty much drops off. I mean, it's still performing pretty well, but it drops off to the level of basically the Odin 2 after 60 seconds. So that's about it for this particular video. So if you have any questions or comments, comment section is open. If you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like. If you'd like to see more gaming and handheld related content from this channel, remember to subscribe so you get the videos when they come out. And I will see you next video.